October 13th, 1992. We're in a place called West Liberty, Iowa. 911 operator gets a very, very frantic call from a woman named Jody Holtz. She starts screaming and she says, "Oh my God, my fiance is dead. My fiance is dead. He's covered in blood. He's face down. I touched him. His body is cold." So the police get there, and inside the house, they find 22-year-old Cory Wieneke, who had been bludgeoned to death in what looks like his own bed. I saw the crime scene photos, and you can actually see the right side of the bed, there's no blood, and then the left side, there's just blood everywhere. It's like Cory was sleeping on the right side, he gets attacked, and then he rolls over trying to get away from the person, blood smearing on the bed, all culminating until he falls off of the bed and the person beats him to death with some kind of object. It looks like it's like a cylinder object. It might be a pipe, something like that. But he has been bludgeoned to death. The cops look around. Nothing's really stolen. Doesn't look like a break-in. A lot of things are in place. So obviously, the first thing we're gonna do is talk to Jody. Jody is the fiance. Jody found the body. What the is going on? So the police start talking to Jody. They've talked to a lot of criminals. They've talked to a lot of innocent people. And Jody her energy that's coming off, it's kind of like the way the officers described it as they don't really think she's involved because she's acting the way they would expect. However, when you're that closely tied to the victim and it looks like a crime of passion, you're not off the hook. So there's a couple details around here. And one of the things they also feel very strongly about, and of course there's forensic details, all these other things, I'm not sure exactly why, but the police said later on, the officers that actually investigated this, they said in their own interview that they felt very, very strongly this person had come to the house with the weapon, which means we kind of have an organized crime, or at least an intentional crime, and they believe that that person came to that house to kill Cory that night. They start interviewing a lot of people, and they're interviewing people that are close to Cory. I mean, really, I think the main person they were looking at the time was the fiance, until they get a call from a farmer. And the farmer tells them that right outside, he's found this bat out just in a ditch. And he knows about the murder because this is a really small town. This is the type of town where people don't even lock their doors. And this is such a small town that there's a lot of crop farmers. So this farmer, when he left to go wherever he was going that day, he remembers he left around 9 a.m. And crop farmers like to drive very slowly on their property. Maybe they don't have too much to do, but on top of that, they're checking on their crops. And he's also looking for trash. He's like, am I gonna pick something up, whatever. So in this morning, the farmer leaves at 9 a.m. And when he comes back at 1 o'clock, he sees the bat. And so he knows about the murder, and he knows the bat is covered in blood. Doesn't touches it, calls investigators. They get there, they take a statement. They see this bat, it's like taped up at the end, and on the other end, where like the bigger end of the bat, there's blood all over it. They talk to the farmer, and he tells them, hey, I left at 9 a.m. and the bat was not there. He's very adamant about this. He's like, when I came back at 1, the bat was there. The way that this bat was placed, it looks like somebody committed the crime, went on a little drive, threw it out the window, and that's where they found it. And they are so sure that this is the murder weapon, but they send it off for forensic testing to confirm it matches with Cory's blood. And then also, we need to look for some fingerprints or some DNA. But the big thing that the cops got from this is a window of when they believe the murder happened. Possibly 9 o'clock to 1 o'clock. The next best thing that they have is to retrace Cory's steps that night, okay? Who was he with? What was he doing? So just to give you guys a little bit of backstory, Cory was 22 when the murder happened, but he was really popular around his town. He knew a lot of people. He was a local bartender, had a lot of friends, and he worked at a bar that is actually still operating right now in Iowa. It's called Wink's Bar. He started working there when he was 16 years old. It was his family's bar. He kind of did like some small tasks, just like cleaning up or restocking. And then he eventually actually became a bartender because he was so charismatic. He brought people in. He was a good entertainer, and they really, really liked him. So he becomes a bartender, and he knows a lot of people in this town, okay? This bar is really, really popular. They're talking to people that might have been involved with drugs that knew Cory. A person showing up at his house in the morning with a bat bludgeoning him to death sounds like drugs. So they start talking to everyone that pretty much ever worked there, trying to figure out what had happened last night. And they find out that night, Cory was hanging out at the bar, kind of the usual suspects. There's a couple of different women there. And he leaves the bar that night with a woman named Wendi Marshall. Now, remember, I said that Cory had a fiance, but he was also kind of a ladies' man. Girls at the bar really liked him. And Wendi Marshall is Cory's baby mama from before he and his fiance were having the kid. Immediately, investigators are like, well, we need to talk to Wendi. Okay, so they go in and they talk to Wendi. She tells the officers that night that she and Cory were supposed to go to a party. They had hung out all night, at the bar. People said that, she was there, Cory was working. And then Wendi claims that when they got off of work, because she was the last person that people saw with Cory, she claims that when they left the bar and they went to go get in the car, there was a woman named Annette Hazen just sitting in Cory's car. Now, I just want to throw this out there. I did read some other reports. Some people said Annette was standing outside, but the most credible one I read claimed that Annette was just sitting inside the car. Because Annette Hazen was another one of Cory's flings, okay? And the type of relationship they had, it kind of went over 3 years or so where, they kind of would see whoever. But a lot of times after the work shift was over, because Annette was a regular at the bar, and then eventually she kind of started working there part-time. Sometimes she and Cory would go home with each other, and he would give her a ride home. They would hook up, and then he would go back home. This relationship had been going on for a while, and so it's very convenient that Wendi was able to plant Annette, her rival, at the scene, right? So she says that it was a really weird encounter. Annette was upset that he was leaving the bar with Wendi. Annette was freaking out about it, and then eventually Annette gets into a really bad argument with Cory. This is what Wendi claims. And Cory feels bad enough that he says, okay, I'm going to go take Annette home. And Annette's in the car with Wendi. It's Wendi, the baby mama, Cory, the victim, and then Annette, who's just like a mysterious person so far in the story. They're all in the car. And Annette is getting increasingly more upset because she knows that Cory is going to drop her off at her house and then go back home with Wendi. And this pisses her off so much that Annette basically almost gets out of the car while it's still in motion, okay? Now, look, Annette is not a major player in the story, but if you ask me, a woman that's just sitting in the car when he gets off of work, or a woman that's so mad that there's somebody else there that's getting out of the car when it's basically still in motion, this is a little crazy. Kind of take it with a grain of salt. Okay, but where did he end up that night? And Wendi says, well, after we dropped her off, he came back to my house and we went to this party. I know it's a little convoluted, but look, it's a cold case, okay? We'll get there. Obviously, we need to talk to Annette Hazen at this point. So the police go and they talk to Annette Hazen and they're like, hey, where were you yesterday? And she knows about Cory, and actually, I'm sorry, I'm missing this detail. Annette actually came to the police station herself. She presented herself probably just the day after they had spoken to Wendi. Maybe she knew that they were thinking about her, who knows? But Annette comes in and she's like, hey, I know you guys are going to want to question me because I was hanging out with him that night. I just want to talk. So they're like, all right, what were you doing? What's your relationship? And she describes their relationship and she says that, Cory was just kind of a fling, no big deal. We would hang out now and then. We've been hooking up for like 3 years or so. Let me give you guys a little backstory on Annette. Annette was a woman that married her high school sweetheart at a very young age. And then she and her high school sweetheart have a daughter. And then later on, about 2 years later, they have a son. And then about 2 years later, it's not really working out. And Annette ends up getting a divorce. She's somewhere in her early 20s. So now, I didn't read a lot of reports about her having a super close relationship with her kids. I don't even know if she's taking care of her kids. But I do know that Annette liked to party. So the first place she started going was Wink's Bar. And she was always up in this, okay? So this was 3 years before the murder. She's always there, and she's always hanging out, and she's always talking to Cory. And the patrons notice this because Annette presents herself as a very lonely woman. But she loved the attention of, at the time, 18-year-old Cory, and she's about 25 or so. I think she was 7 years his senior. She loves this attention from this guy because Cory's popular, everyone likes him, there's all these girls, and so Annette pursues him, probably for validation. But Cory tells her pretty early on, look, I got other women I talk to, I got all this, and Annette says, oh yeah, it's cool, I don't care, it's whatever. Annette cared. She absolutely cared. I think, based off of everything I read, that Annette was trying to do something that some of us have done before, a lot of guys have experienced before, and that's playing cool girl and just hoping that if you just kind of sit there like a doormat, that he'll think you're so chill and want to end up with you one day. That's not how it works. That's not how it works at all. If you present yourself as a doormat, then somebody will always treat you as a doormat. Now, another word for what Annette was doing was she was internalizing. Everything she really wanted, she wasn't communicating it. She was just kind of fantasizing. And every time Cory got into a relationship with these women that got more significant, like when he got the girl pregnant, now he's got a fiance, I think it was really ticking at Annette. They asked Annette about her relationship with Cory, and I feel like she really kind of downplayed it. But they're like, you know what, let's get to the meat of it. Annette, where were you between 9 a.m. and 1 p.m. on the day of Cory's murder? And Annette's got all the answers. She says, I think around 8:30 in the morning, somebody dropped me off for this roofing job. And then my sister picked me up afterwards, and, we did something. And she says, oh, actually, I had left a book in Cory's car, and I'd driven by around 10 o'clock to go to his house to pick it up, but when I knocked, nobody was there. And they say, okay, and then what'd you do after that? And she's like, I hung out with my sister, we did this, we did that, we did this. Okay, well, we need to check in on that. So they interrogate her sister, and actually what happens is Annette's sister, she basically affirms everything she says. She's like, yeah, I picked her up at this time. We went and did this, we did this, da-da-da-da. And on top of that, Annette's sister actually has a doctor's note that I'm not sure why it was important, but it did show some kind of scheduling information. And then they also had multiple receipts from their day. And then on top of that, to double clear her down, Annette takes a polygraph test. And Annette takes that polygraph test and she passes with flying colors. They interview over 400 people for this case because this is a small town and people are always calling up because they want to be the person that cracks it. They want to crack, they want to get in there. Over time, they're interviewing all of these people, but the tips stop coming in, the information stops coming in, the ideas stop coming in, and the case goes cold. I'm going to need y'all to strap in. The case goes cold until December 2017. Not too long ago. When I hear 2017, I'm like, damn, this is recent. Okay. In December 2017, a guy who's actually Special Agent Trent Valletta from the DCI shows up to a local hospital in Iowa. He's investigating another case and he has to interview a witness. He gets into a conversation with the head nurse, Jessica Becker. I don't know how they started talking, but they just start chatting. Now, remember, the Cory Wieneke case is famous in this town. I mean, the bar that his family operates, that he still worked at, is still running to this day. Jessica Becker runs into Special Agent Trent, and they start talking. And he mentions that he does cold cases. And Jessica's like, you do cold cases? And she's really stunned. And he's like, yeah, I do cold cases. And then she asked him, what kind of credibility does a statement from a 9-year-old have on a cold case? And he said, what are you talking about? And she mentions the name Cory Wieneke. And he calls up his boy because he's heard of this case before. And he's like, hey, can you come with me to take this statement from this woman that says she might know something about the case? And Jessica Becker tells a very strange story of something that she witnessed back in 1992, the day after Cory Wieneke was murdered. Jessica was staying over at her friend Jackie Hazen's house that night. Now, there's a lot of names floating around, but y'all that have been listening up might feel like the name Hazen sounds a little familiar. Probably because we were just talking about Annette Hazen a minute ago, the crazy that was in the car. So Jackie Becker is hanging out with a girl named Jackie Hazen, who happens to be Annette Hazen's niece. And they're having a sleepover that night. And around midnight, Jessica Becker gets a little hungry. And she decides to go downstairs. And what she sees is Annette Hazen dressed in all black. And she has all of these candles lit up around her. And she doesn't see Jackie Becker, so she continues to do what she was doing. And Jackie, just kind of looking over, she sees Annette, and Annette is crying hysterically. I mean, almost on the floor. She doesn't even see Jackie because she's just so in her emotions, just throwing her hands up and crying and screaming. And she's saying, Cory, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I killed you. I'm so sorry. I wish I could bring you back. I loved you, Cory. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And Jessica Becker sees this and she goes, what the f***? I'm going back upstairs. So she does. And she doesn't tell anyone except her mom. So Jessica, the next morning, tells her mom what she saw, because everyone knows about the Cory Wieneke case. And Jessica's mom believes her, but because Annette was involved with a bunch of very dangerous people, drug dealers, criminals, and Cory might have had some odd connections too, for the safety of her family, Jessica Becker's mom never reports this to the police. She doesn't know how much credibility she believes her daughter, but she just doesn't know what could happen. So they don't tell anyone. After this, the police are like, this shit, pick this shit up. So I wish I had this audio for you guys, but I heard it somewhere else, and I think it's like a copyrighted thing, but I'm just gonna tell you guys what happened. So the police hear this, and they take Annette in for questioning. She sits down, and I mean, oh my God, her demeanor is just so like, she's just hard chilling while she's going through this, okay? She's just like, yeah, you know, okay. And they said, like, in the interview, they're like, Annette, I know you have to go back to work soon. She's like, yeah, but I've got about an hour, and then I gotta head out. So they do the interview. She kind of, glazes over it. It's no big deal. And they come back, and they're like, man, we know you did this shit. So they go back to Annette's house. So they go back to Annette's house a second time. And this time, the officer, he's not having it. He's wearing a wire, and he's sitting down in her living room. And a couple of conversations happen, and then eventually he gets to the big push, okay? And he said, Annette, do you by chance remember, 20 years ago saying these things? And he starts repeating, oh no, Cory, I'm so sorry for killing you. Cory, I love you. Cory, I'm so sorry. And then Annette freaks out. She gets up and she says, you need to leave, and I'm calling my attorney. And he keeps reading the quotes. I'm so sorry I killed you, Cory. And she's like, you need to get out. So he leaves, and now they got her reaction on camera, right? So it's time. Annette has now been arrested for the murder of Cory Wieneke, right? But it's not over yet, because this is a 25-year trial, and our only witness right now is a girl that was 9 years old when it happened. At the trial, like I said, the only hard evidence is Jessica's testimony. By the way, this was 25 years later. Annette had a family. She had kids. It was just, oh, let's keep it going, right? These criminal defense attorneys, they spin some crazy shit. And I like to call it out because sometimes we experience these kind of lies in our own waking life. So it's important to see what kind of lies somebody can spin and then how it affects things. So Annette's criminal defense team that wanted to get her off the hook, they claimed that Jessica Becker was lying about what she witnessed. And the motive they gave? They say that Jessica was angry that Annette had a sexual relationship with her stepfather, and she made this all up for revenge. The jury believed it, and the trial was basically thrown out and was ruled a mistrial. So, we're not done yet. Like I said, it's a small town. And this is really, it's really disappointing. It's really echoed through the neighborhood. And at one point, Cory Wieneke's mom is at a funeral for something else, and ends up getting into a conversation with somebody. And of course, Cory comes up because the trial just ended. And the lady is talking to Cory's mom and says, it really pisses me off that they never talked to my son for this second investigation. And Cory's mom like, what do you mean? Why? Who is your son? And the lady says, oh, my son, Scott Payne. He saw something. So Cory's mom gets on the phone and says, hey, y'all need to call Scott Payne. The cops go in there and they start looking through the files and they see the name Scott Payne. And so they interviewed him in the past, but for some reason it just didn't get taken in. So they hit up Scott Payne again. And he said 25 years ago, he said, on the day of Cory Wieneke's murder, he saw Annette Hazen burning clothes that had blood on them. Once again, we've got witnesses, but you guys gotta understand, these are not very, very strong witnesses. It's gonna be hard to make this hold up in the court. They're gonna try to dismiss this guy. They're gonna be like, that's not blood. How were you so sure that was blood 25 years ago? But the detective knows this, and he wants to know how credible his witness is. And he says, how are you so sure that was blood? Because that's exactly what Annette's team is gonna ask when they cross-examine him. And this guy gives the most perfect answer that he possibly could for a witness. He tells the officer, well, I work at a slaughterhouse. I get blood on my clothes every day. I know exactly what blood on clothes looks like. Put him on the stand! So they put him on the stand, and this time they come in hot. They go all out to paint a story of a jealous woman that couldn't take no for an answer, that spotted Cory Wieneke's car at the other woman's house that night and was so infuriated by it that she waited for him to go home. She broke into his house and she bludgeoned the man to death in his own bed while he slept. After 16 hours of deliberation, the jury came back and they found Annette guilty. Second-degree murder, 50 years in jail. Yo, when I heard how they solved this, that they just ran into this woman and she's like, oh, do you do cold cases? And they're like, yeah, we do cold cases. And she just, also the almost ceremonious way that she did that was just so crazy, dude. It was so crazy. So I thought that story was very, very fascinating. I don't even know if she has a chance of parole, but either way, she's much, much older now. Let's see, this happened 20 years ago. She was 29 when it happened, so she's probably about 50, 55 now. She ain't going anywhere, nowhere.